What would happen if a man were insulted and thrown out of a bank, only to reveal that he is actually its CEO? On what seemed like an ordinary morning at the Empire Trust headquarters branch, no one could have predicted that a few brief minutes would shake the foundation of what appeared to be an unshakable institution. The bank lobby, designed with elegance, high ceilings, gleaming marble floors, and gold-trimmed wall clocks ticking steadily, exuded an air of formality and power. Yet that silence was shattered by a sharp voice that cracked like a whip. "Security, escort that man out immediately." The voice belonged to Olivia Barnes, the branch manager who prided herself on upholding the standard of service at all costs. Standing across from her was a black man in his early 40s, wearing a neatly tailored grey coat and a classic wristwatch. A perfectly ordinary image, except for the $80,000 withdrawal slip lying in front of him. His name was Jonathan Miles, and at that moment, no one in the building knew he was the CEO of Empire Trust. He didn't shout, didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at the security guard approaching and calmly said, "I'm only requesting to withdraw money from my own account. I've provided all the required documents, I haven't caused a scene, and I haven't raised my voice." But his words did nothing to stop Olivia. She looked at Jonathan with a gaze that treated him like a threat, then raised her voice even louder, clearly wanting the entire lobby to hear, "We don't hand out cash to imposters or to people like you." The phrase "people like you" fell like a blade, slicing not only into Jonathan's dignity, but also into the heavy silence that followed. A few customers exchanged glances. One or two raised their phones to start recording, while others stood frozen, afraid to speak up. Two security guards stepped forward, one placing a hand gently on Jonathan's arm as a silent signal to escort him out. But just before leaving, Jonathan quietly reached into the inner pocket of his coat. The gesture tightened the air like a drawn wire. Olivia stepped back slightly, her eyes sharp with suspicion. One of the guards instinctively tightened his grip, his other hand inching toward his waistline. A reflexive move, as if preparing for a threat. But instead of anything alarming, Jonathan simply pulled out a phone. He didn't call the police. He didn't call a lawyer. He made one single call. And that call would trigger a chain of events that would force the entire financial industry to reckon with itself. 2 decades before walking into that bank lobby as a customer being humiliated, Jonathan Miles once stood on the other side of the teller counter, his hands trembling as he pressed his fingerprint onto the time clock for the very first time. His old name tag still sits in the drawer of his first desk. Jonathan, teller trainee. He didn't come from a prominent family, had no powerful connections or polished background. He was born in a poor neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, where dreams were often drowned beneath the wail of police sirens and flickering streetlights slicing through the dark. But if the world was unfair to him, he made up for it with something no one could take away: resilience. Jonathan arrived at the bank each day before the doors opened and was the last to leave after locking the vault. He didn't just learn how to count cash. He learned how to listen to complaints, how to withstand pressure, how to remain calm when customers got angry or when statements didn't balance. When he was promoted to credit officer, the first internal employee to be honored in 5 years, Jonathan didn't celebrate. Instead, he went home, opened his worn-out laptop, and started learning how to read financial reports like an investor. He earned a partial scholarship for an MBA at Stanford, studied while working, and took care of his elderly mother, who was battling diabetes. 3 years later, he turned a failing branch into the fastest-growing unit in the region. With each new promotion, with every restructuring, the name Jonathan Miles appeared more frequently in executive meetings. But with each of those steps forward, he heard the whispers more clearly. Will our high net worth clients feel comfortable with him representing the firm? Does he really look like a CEO? Maybe Empire Trust should preserve its traditional image. He heard it all. He didn't push back. He didn't lash out. He simply smiled and kept outperforming anyone who had ever sat in that chair. But what Jonathan truly couldn't ignore came later, when he officially took the helm and discovered a series of internal reports. The numbers at first glance appeared flawless on the customer satisfaction surveys. But as he dug into the raw data, irregularities began to surface. Black clients, immigrants, the elderly were repeatedly being made to wait longer, denied lawful transactions without clear explanation. These discrepancies were deliberately buried under the term manual adjustment. And that was the moment Jonathan made a decision. If he wanted to uncover the truth, he couldn't do it from the executive office. He had to step down. He had to become anonymous. And he had to face the rawest version of reality himself. On a Tuesday morning, before the sun had fully risen and the intersection still held the damp scent of the night's rain, Jonathan Miles walked into the main branch of Empire Trust. Not in his usual polished suit, but in a deep blue hoodie, simple khaki pants, and worn sneakers. A low-pulled baseball cap shadowed his familiar forehead, and his freshly shaved face made him look like just another middle-class man out for a walk. No one knew who he was, and that was exactly how he wanted it. To truly understand what was happening inside the organization he led, Jonathan couldn't be treated like a CEO. He needed to be seen the way ordinary people were seen. Sitting on the bench near the entrance, he quietly observed. Within 15 minutes, he understood why the pristine figures in the reports didn't align with reality. A white man in a suit walked in, and before he could even touch the counter, a staff member greeted him warmly and led him to a private consultation desk. Moments later, an elderly Asian couple was directed to the ticket number machine without so much as a smile. A casually dressed white woman approached the express counter, was asked about her weekend, and completed her transaction in under 2 minutes. But then, a Latino man stepped up with a check to cash and was immediately asked for additional ID, scrutinized over every detail, and subjected to a nearly 10-minute process. Jonathan watched this same pattern repeat 6 more times. He didn't need another spreadsheet. The system wasn't just flawed, it was biased. When his turn finally came, after waiting 37 minutes, while 3 white customers who arrived after him had already been served, Jonathan stepped up to the counter, manned by a young teller named Kate. She offered a stiff smile, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "I'd like to withdraw $80,000, he said calmly, handing over his documents and card. Kate's eyes widened. Her hand hovered over the driver's license, then paused as she stared at him, trying to confirm they were the same person. After a few awkward seconds, she turned and called over a colleague, Greg, a senior teller. Greg approached, stood directly behind. Kate leaned in close and looked Jonathan over from above with a probing stare. "Is there a problem here?" he asked loudly, ensuring everyone in the lobby could hear. The air thickened. Jonathan remained composed. "No problem. I'm simply withdrawing from my personal account." Greg picked up the documents, squinted at them, then spoke with a loaded tone. "We've had a few unusual cases with these types of accounts lately, so we have to be extra cautious." "These types of accounts?" Jonathan asked back, his voice light as air but sharp as a blade. Greg didn't answer. He turned to Kate. "Pull up the transaction history." No further explanation was needed. Jonathan already knew what they were questioning, and it had nothing to do with the numbers. They questioned him because of the color of his skin. The atmosphere inside the Empire Trust lobby felt as though it had been coated with an invisible layer of prejudice. All eyes were now fixed on counter number 3, where Jonathan Miles stood tall, his gaze calm and unwavering against the cold scrutiny of Greg and Kate. The murmurs began to swell, like invisible cords tightening around his dignity. Greg's voice sharpened. "We just need to verify things more thoroughly. It's just that this is a very large transaction." But Jonathan knew full well. The issue wasn't the amount. It was the person requesting it. And just as he had anticipated, another employee, Jason, quietly approached. He didn't greet or ask anything, just leaned in to whisper to Greg. But the whisper wasn't low enough for Jonathan not to hear it. Could be money laundering, like a settlement or lottery winner. He glanced down at Jonathan's shoes and sneered. The entire bank seemed to freeze in a chilling kind of silence. The kind of silence born from contempt disguised as casual conversation. Jason looked Jonathan straight in the eyes. "We just want to be sure the money actually belongs to you. You understand that, right?" The words, seemingly polite, were in fact a blade aimed straight at his pride. Jonathan didn't flinch. He stood there, no furrowed brow, no angry retort. "I understand the need for caution," he replied, "but I've provided all the necessary documents. I am a long-time customer of this bank, and I am requesting to be served according to standard procedures." At that moment, Jason signaled for Olivia, the branch manager, to step in. She emerged from her office, her high heels striking the marble floor in even clicks, her eyes sharp like a pair of shears that had never dulled. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked, though clearly she already knew. No introduction, no greeting. She looked at Jonathan as if he were a problem she had no interest in solving. "You want to withdraw this amount?" she asked, her polite smile reaching only to her cheekbones, never touching her eyes. "I need to know." "What for?" Jonathan's tone remained steady, neither raised nor lowered. "I don't believe banking law requires customers to explain why they withdraw their own money." Olivia gave a dry laugh, but the anger in her eyes was starting to show. "This amount is rather large, given your appearance," she said. "We maintain a certain level of service for different customer groups." Those words, "your appearance," "customer groups," were like stones hurled from velvet gloves. The entire lobby seemed to freeze. Greg looked down, pretending to be busy. Kate fiddled nervously with a stack of unnecessary paperwork. Jason crossed his arms with smug satisfaction. And Jonathan, surrounded by the gazes and the quiet disdain, did not back down, because he knew their masks were beginning to slip. And he also knew the real stage was only just being set. Surrounded by cold stares and veiled words, Jonathan Miles remained astonishingly composed, but Olivia Barnes had lost her patience. His presence was like a bone lodged in the throat of a system accustomed to operating smoothly within rigid molds. She turned to security, her voice crisp like an administrative order. "Escort this man out of the bank, immediately." A wave of murmurs spread among the customers waiting in line. Phones began to emerge from pockets. A young woman snapped a photo. An older man furrowed his brow. Jonathan stood still, neither stepping back nor withdrawing his request. "I simply want to withdraw money that belongs to me, from an account that bears my name. I've submitted all proper documentation. I haven't raised my voice, I haven't caused a disturbance. If this is considered disorderly conduct, then the problem isn't with me. The security guard, a tall man with a close-cropped haircut, looked uncertainly from Olivia to Jonathan. One hand rested lightly on Jonathan's arm, not gripping, as though even he didn't believe what he was being asked to do was right. Olivia's eyes sharpened. Don't you get it? We don't issue cash to frauds or people like you. That line, laid bare and unfiltered, was the only thing in that quiet room capable of striking the hearts of those watching. A few customers exhaled audibly. A little girl clutched her mother's hand. The air seemed to thicken. Yet Jonathan didn't pull away or shout. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Olivia took a step back, suspicion and unease flickering in her eyes. The security guard braced the arm still resting on Jonathan and moved the other toward his belt, a trained reflex. But Jonathan only pulled out a phone. With the calmness of someone making a dinner reservation, he raised the phone to his ear. Hello, this is Jonathan Miles. I am currently at Empire Trust's main branch. I am being obstructed and escorted out while simply attempting to make a withdrawal from my personal account. No one in the room fully grasped what was happening, but his voice, measured, professional, without a trace of panic, made the guard instinctively loosen his grip. Olivia flushed red, not from embarrassment, but from rage. Hang up the phone now. If you don't, I'll call the police and have you forcibly removed under protocol, Olivia nearly shouted, but Jonathan continued. Yes, I'm still being detained, he said into the receiver. They are refusing to complete the transaction and are now forcing me to leave a premises where I have full legal right to be. It was his composure that truly frightened Olivia, because this man did not act like someone powerless. He didn't resist, but he didn't yield either. He seemed like someone who held something much bigger than anyone in that room could imagine. A truth that in just a few more minutes would reveal everything. The grand lobby of Empire Trust now resembled a stage, yet none of the actors seemed aware of the roles they were playing. Olivia Barnes continued barking orders, clinging to the confidence of someone accustomed to wielding authority in her domain. But when she heard Jonathan utter the name Ethan Caldwell, her voice faltered. It wasn't just a name. It belonged to the National Chief Operating Officer of Empire Trust, a man known for never answering his phone outside working hours. Yet Jonathan not only reached him, he spoke with him as an equal. In fact, almost as a superior. Ethan, I am being obstructed from making a withdrawal at the main branch. I need you here immediately. Security is holding me, and they seem unaware of who I am. On the other end of the line, Ethan said very little, paused for a moment, then hung up. But the storm had already started to move. At that very moment, on the 42nd floor of the headquarters, just a few blocks away, the executive suite went into emergency mode. Ethan sprang up from his chair, his face draining of color as if a fire alarm had just sounded. Pull all customer complaints from the main branch over the past 12 months, he barked to his assistant. Connect the branch's surveillance cameras to the boardroom display, and get legal on the line now. In under 7 minutes, the entire senior executive team, including board members, the chief legal officer, and the head of human resources, had gathered in the emergency conference room. On the large screen, Jonathan Miles appeared in high resolution, being held by security, phone still pressed to his ear. One director gasped, "Dear God, that's Jonathan. That's our CEO." The room turned visibly colder. Ethan spoke only once. Record every second, every glance, every word. we're witnessing the biggest scandal in this bank's history." Meanwhile, back at the branch, Olivia felt her legs weakening. She was no longer certain who she had just mistreated. The very people she used to judge, those she classified as risk-tier customers, might now be the ones running the entire system. Greg quietly backed away. Jason pretended to take a call. Kate kept her head down, avoiding all eye contact, and the security guard, realizing he had been gripping the arm of the national CEO, quickly let go as if burned by electricity. Jonathan stood firm, not angry, not lashing out. But his silence had become a wordless indictment, louder than any lawsuit. And when the large doors of the branch burst open, the resolute footsteps of Ethan Caldwell echoed like thunder in a dry season. Everyone in the room knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. The grand doors of Empire Trust swung open with a force that echoed through the entire lobby. Every bowed head lifted in unison. All eyes turned toward the man striding through the glass entryway that caught the soft light of the autumn morning. It was Ethan Caldwell, and within this organization, his sudden arrival always signaled a storm. Ethan did not speak to anyone. With a single look, he made every employee step back, and when his eyes met the image of Jonathan Miles, standing encircled by doubt and disbelief, he paused for only a second, then delivered his words with unmistakable clarity and weight, as if issuing a sentence. "Let him go, immediately." The guard released his grip. Jason retreated behind the counter, like he wanted to disappear. Olivia still did not fully grasp what was happening, until Ethan stepped right in front of her and spoke, no longer bound by politeness. "Do you even realize who it is you just humiliated?" Olivia opened her mouth to respond, but not a single word came out. Ethan turned to Jonathan, and the tension in his face dissolved into unmistakable respect. "I am deeply sorry for what happened here, especially in a place that bears the name of the very institution you rebuilt from the ground up." Then he faced the entire branch staff. For a moment, the lobby was completely silent, and Ethan spoke slowly, with precision and finality. "The man you doubted, harassed, and degraded is Jonathan Miles, Chief Executive Officer of Empire Trust, and the very person who signs the paychecks you cash." The air cracked open. Greg stepped backward, his lips drained of color. Jason stared at the floor. Olivia trembled, as if she had just fallen from a tower of authority she believed was untouchable. Kate's eyes began to well with tears. Jonathan did not smile. He did not lash out. He simply stood there, a mirror reflecting the truth of every person in that room. When he spoke, his voice was as steady as it had been from the start, but each word cut through the air like a blade, removing every layer of excuse. "Olivia, Greg, Jason, you are terminated, effective immediately." No shouting, no theatrics, just a verdict delivered in the calm voice of a man who had been disrespected and still chose to preserve his dignity to the very end. Ethan nodded in confirmation. "Severe violation of our fair service policy, discriminatory conduct, and abuse of authority. Every action this morning has been recorded and archived. There is no room for denial." The remaining staff stayed silent. No one came to their defense. No one could pretend what just happened was a misunderstanding. In the middle of the lobby, Jonathan turned to the waiting area, where an elderly Asian gentleman still sat patiently for his turn. Jonathan walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Today, I'll serve you. Personally." It wasn't a publicity gesture. It was a correction, through action, not apology. The entire incident unfolded in just 7 minutes. 7 minutes from the moment Jonathan Miles was held by the arm at the counter to the moment he announced the immediate termination of 3 key employees in the center of the bank's grand lobby. No one in the building that day could forget the feeling of watching those uniforms unravel like masks, exposing the truth behind misused power and prejudice. And no one could deny it. Everything changed from that moment on. Jonathan did not return to his office right away. He stayed, walking quietly past each teller station, not to assert dominance, but to listen. A young employee whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't step in." He replied gently, "Silence is the only thing that feeds injustice." Then he requested that every anonymous customer complaint from this branch over the past 3 years delivered directly to the CEO's office. "We'll start again from here, not with a press conference, but by rebuilding trust one transaction at a time." And soon after, an internal memo was sent across the entire Empire Trust network. A new policy titled Equitable Service for All Clients would take effect immediately. Branches with a history of service disparities would undergo internal cultural audits. Mid-level management would be required to complete a training program on unconscious bias, and for the first time, customers would be invited to participate in service quality panels in a completely transparent manner. But perhaps what touched people the most that morning was not the policy changes. It was Jonathan's final act before leaving the branch. He returned to the front desk and asked to borrow the internal microphone. "I didn't come here to punish," he said. "I came to prove that a system is only worth keeping if it refuses to let anyone be treated as lesser because of how they look, how they speak, or the color of their skin. Empire Trust may not be the biggest bank, but it will be one where every customer, no matter who they are, is treated with equal respect." The first clap came from an elderly woman, then grew into a spontaneous wave of applause. Those who had witnessed the cruelty that morning now looked at Jonathan not just as a CEO, but as a living reminder that justice can exist even in a world as unforgiving as finance, and that sometimes to change an entire system, you do not need to shout a slogan. You just need to stand your ground, speak the truth, and refuse to accept injustice, even when it is dressed in a tailored suit and a gold nameplate. In the world of finance, where everything seems to be determined by numbers, the one thing most easily overlooked is how people treat one another. Jonathan Miles's story is not just about an exposed act of discrimination, but a wake-up call to an entire system. The true power does not lie in a title, but in dignity. If you believe that respect should never depend on skin color, clothing, or accent, make sure to like this video and subscribe to follow more stories of courage that challenge injustice. And don't forget to leave a comment with the phrase, "Respect matters," so we can help spread this message together.